Hello and welcome to the African Tech Roundup, episode 106. Now, this is where we round up the most important tech, digital, and innovation news from across the African continent. My name is Andile Masugu. Thanks for listening in. And once again, I'm rolling with the homie, Musa Kalenga. What's up, bro?
Hey, Andile. Welcome. Thank you very much for having me. And I'm glad to be back, as always.
Don't say it like you're surprised, bro. This is how it's going to be.
I'm always surprised, when you get the call back and you're not expecting it. But yes, thank you for inviting me back again.
Yeah, you're only just selling out venues and, so, I mean, we're honored. What can I say?
Selling out tours, man. I've been busy for the last couple of weeks. Had two really awesome masterclasses, which, as you said, were sold out, Johannesburg and Pretoria. Spent some time in Cape Town, now back in Joburg. So, yeah, it's been busy, but as always, love spending time with the Africa Tech Roundup family, man.
For sure, bro. But listen, it's a good one, too. We've got quite a bit of news coming up. Some international news that got us chatting long before the show began, as well as some interesting things happening in the renewable energy space out in East Africa. But we'll talk about all of that as soon as we do this. This episode of the African Tech Roundup is brought to you by GoDaddy. GoDaddy makes registering domain names fast, simple, and affordable. They're the world's largest domain registrar, trusted by over 13 million customers around the globe. And they provide everything you need to get your business set up online, including award-winning 24/7 support. Now, to save 30% on a new domain name or to use any of their other services, go to trygodaddy.com/African Tech. Again, that's trygodaddy.com/African Tech to save yourself 30%. And so, with all that said, it's straight into this week's headlines. Malawi is where we begin this show this week. They've just landed $72 million from the World Bank to, quote, help digitize the country. Should we be excited, Musa?
Well, to be honest, when I read that, I was like, what on earth does digitizing a country mean? Because there's a lot of connotations and potential interpretations of what digitizing a country meant. So I did a little bit of digging to try and find out exactly what they meant. And it seems like there's going to be quite a long and deep drive around essentially laying down the foundations around what it's going to take to create a completely digitized Malawian government and providing the services and infrastructure to support Malawian citizens. The Foundations project is actually there to increase affordable, high-quality internet services. And in so doing, it's trying to enable citizens as well as improve government's capability. So I think ultimately that's a great thing. It's not going to be something that's done overnight. There's going to be a lot of groundwork, especially from an infrastructure perspective. There's going to be a hell of a lot of discussions around regulation, strategy, and
also where to start, right? Like, do we start with Home Affairs? Do we start with digitizing schools? Do we start with digitizing the criminal justice system?
Yeah, and I think that's an important thing to consider. So strategically speaking, there's lots of different subcomponents, and you can get it wrong if you do the wrong thing at the wrong time. So, I mean, if you look at the objective around strengthening the capacity for institutions as an example, this is providing enough infrastructure that can give feasibility, audit trails, capacity, management, monitoring. That's a lot of stuff. So I think the starting point for me would be to get the infrastructure piece right. I would think is that give as many people as much access as possible. So if you're talking about remote villages that need to be connecting, that has to be your starting point. The second, I would say, would be the digitization or the centralization of data storage. So, if we're going to be accessing citizen data or business or enterprise data, you need to have a reference point that's easy and that can be used. And then the third would be kind of the front-facing delivery mechanism. So how is it that you go and renew a license? How do you apply for certain things? And then there's going to be quite a hell of a lot of testing in terms of the cycle for making sure that things work. So in my mind, that's kind of how it would roll out. But how these things go sometimes.
I imagine there'll be a lot of people lobbying the Malawian government. Proponents for internet as a right are going to be like, listen, we need to get free Wi-Fi to the masses. You're going to have the likes of Cisco probably lobbying to get like a backbone going. Listen, start with a platform you can integrate everything into and then work from there. Yeah, I mean, which big names do you expect to start sort of flying their big guns into Malawi to take meetings with?
Well, you've mentioned a number of them. I think the Ciscos of the world, the IBMs of the world, the Microsoft. Those are all people that are looking at those economies to try and find growth. In fact, I think Laura Kullenberg, who's from the World Bank, says that technology is an absolutely essential for Malawi in terms of the social economic development. commerce as well as moving services online. And when someone from the World Bank is saying such things, they obviously say that with I think two hats. The first hat is the heartstrings and making sure you deliver value, but I think the second hat is very much commercial. So partners related to the World Bank will definitely be looking at how they can optimize, in inverted commas. And we've had lots of discussions about what exactly optimization means. So my caution, that I'd put out, especially to the finance minister who's driving this agenda, my caution is that set up the right brains trust of people that can have the correct conversations. And that'll be able to deliver value ultimately in the short and the long run to the Malawian citizen. So I'm quite emotional about that because my mother's Malawian, so they better do the right thing.
Dude, I didn't know that.
Didn't you know my mother's Malawian?
No, I had no idea.
Yeah, my mother's Malawian. My dad's Zambian. My mother's a Malawian, born in Lily.
You learn a new thing every day. Institutions like the World Bank, the IMF, for example, have been criticized for decades now for being the sort of institutions that seem content to drive impoverished nations, mostly like Malawi, into perpetual debt cycles that they can never leave. And it'd be interesting to sort of get an in on how the World Bank thinks about quote unquote sovereign projects like this. Is there a beginning and an end to the way they look at things like this? Or is this the start of a drip that's just going to carry on and on and on and on and basically need to become a feature of a country like Malawi's budget?
Yeah, I think you're touching on an important thing here, Andile. I believe that one of the most effective ways to own the soul of a country is to own the infrastructure. And typically projects and or movements of this scale start out with a huge play from an infrastructure investment perspective. And once you get someone in on an infrastructure level, it's difficult to get them out. Ultimately, the conversation that needs to be had is that's the correct balance as far as receiving foreign investment or foreign aid or foreign support. And what is the balance and what is the breaking point between that foreign aid translating itself into not being able to actually pass and transcend value on into the Malawian citizens versus what's the right way and the most responsible way to take that aid or that investment, deploy it optimally, but immediately transfer rights and benefits over to Malawian citizens from a high level right down to the bottom. So I think that's the conversation which we've been driving at for a number of episodes. And this is typically one of those projects that's going to have that thinking baked in from the beginning. But if it doesn't, I think it is going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy, as you've mentioned. Once you get someone in that has paid for your infrastructure and that has essentially allowed you, or in inverted commas, ushered you into the digital age, they're there to stay, and that means that we're not necessarily changing anything. We're just perpetuating, the unfortunate benefit of or downfall anyway of foreign aid. So my opinion is that the starting point is going to be critical. And if it doesn't get handled correctly, your assumption around perpetuating this challenge is definitely going to come true.
And staying with infrastructure news, incidentally, the renewable energy project that I alluded to at the top of the episode actually being sold currently as the largest wind farm project in sub-Saharan Africa is actually in Kenya and it's apparently ready for launch. The Danish wind turbine maker Vestas Wind Systems has installed 365 turbines at the Lake Turkana project. It's in the north of Kenya, and apparently they've completed construction of this project with 2 months to spare, 2 months ahead of schedule. Sounding good. It does appear, though, that there's a PR push to let everyone know, I guess all the stakeholders know, like, listen, Vestas has done everything they needed to do. It's now up to the Kenyan government that apparently has not installed the transmission lines needed to get the clean power from the actual wind farm to their customers. It's actually the Kenyan government, I feel like they want us to know, that hasn't done their job to make sure that this project is ready to go online.
Yeah, some very clever and proactive PR, as you've mentioned. I think it's also important to note that I think the Kenyan government currently is producing about 80% of Kenya's electricity, and it's majority owned by the Kenyan government, which is about 71%. But the reality is that there's still a huge challenge in growing the amount of electricity available, simply because of the burgeoning middle class and the growing suburbia in Kenya. And we know that this electricity consumption is growing probably at about 6%. So, we can't discount the fact that this kind of new, cleaner approach to producing power or renewable energy is important and required. But I think, as I said, it's some clever strategic positioning around PR, almost shifting the blame so that nobody ultimately comes back and holds them accountable. But, as I said, let's hope we get over this little hurdle. I think they seem to be right in the last stretch. So
yeah, and I mean, the project's meant to add something like 310 megawatts of power to Kenya's grid. It's cost the Kenyan people $678 million and essentially constitutes the country's largest single private investment in history. Now, again, these issues come into play. You've got a consortium here in the form of the Lake Turkana project, the likes of Vestas wind systems being invested, but also the likes of the Finnish Fund for Industrial Cooperation, the Investment Fund for Developing Countries, KPNP Africa, the Sandpiper, just to name some. Vestas itself, of course, owning a 12.5% stake in the project, which apparently once it's done, they're going to be selling that stake to guess who? Google.
Cue our music. Where's our syndicate music? Conspiracy theory. Selling to Google, hey? And
And not a conspiracy theory. I mean, this is what they've put out. They're basically like, listen, look, we're going to make the thing. We're going to make sure it's up and running. And Google's interested in our stake. And we're happy to pass that along, which is a big deal. I mean, this wind farm is expected to provide something like 15% of Kenya's total electricity needs. I expect this has serious lucrative potential for this consortium.
Yeah, Google's agenda in Africa is quite clear. From an infrastructure perspective, they're going to make a huge play. A lot of the Google subsidiary services are going to require, electricity. They're going to require access to cloud services, et cetera, et cetera. So I find it really interesting that they're involved in that consortium and in the East Africa region as well. I mean, Kenya is obviously an entry point that provides them a very good point of advantage.
I was challenged at the Afrobytes conference in Paris recently. Someone had listened to the last time you and I were both on the mic, and the whole expat founder debate, and I mean we touched on so many things, but someone came away from listening to us thinking, Andile, are you anti-capitalism? And of course I've got Marxist leanings. That isn't to say I am a Marxist. I think I identify as a sort of social capitalist, if that's even a thing. And I've said that on the show before as well. I think what's been written up about this particular project and why it's been delayed for so many years, apparently as early as 2011, this project was meant to have gone online. It's faced delays due to what some people are calling bureaucratic issues. The way I see it really is we can't ignore what's at stake in terms of the whole privatization issue. Am I anti-privatization, anti-capitalist power, sort of owning means of production or infrastructure? Inherently, no. I am concerned about some of the things that you raise quite frequently, which is how will all of this eventually, and I say eventually because right now it's not going to serve anyone on the ground, but how will it eventually directly serve the average Kenyan in this case, or the average African, or the average global citizen who isn't a shareholder of said consortium or a direct beneficiary from a financial perspective of an infrastructural development project like this?
Yeah, I think, capitalism has ideologies, right? And it's got a strata of ideologies. I think it's only fair that as young African people, we define the ideology in which we are okay with the rest of the world playing with us from a capital perspective, right? That's okay. We shouldn't be made to feel as though we have to over-justify that. That's the first thing. So as you mentioned, someone that may have taken a little bit of offense to the standpoint we had in the last discussion, my viewpoint is quite simple, is that, if we don't hold you accountable, when I say you, people that are coming in, with ideas around expropriation and creating value and bringing in, foreign investment, if we don't hold those kind of people accountable, who's going to do that job, right? Firstly. The second thing is that, as you've mentioned, if in its extreme expression, if there was this kind of warm and fuzzy, of course we're trying to do well and give back to Africa thing, which I don't really ultimately believe in, then there would be more of a holistic and definite approach to some of these projects. So, as you've mentioned, what's the start date? What's the finish date? Show me what is going to be beneficiated locally and show me when you're going to be leaving. right? If you're going to be completely crude about it. Now, is that the way you'd want to do business? No. But is that the ideology which we need to be attaching to capitalism to have proper debates? I think absolutely yes, because we have to correct. We're self-correcting for a number of years, hundreds and hundreds of years. Firstly. Secondly, is that we have to deal with the current problems on the table, and we're not going to play ignorant to the fact that there are problems. And hence why I think that the debate is healthy. I think the debate is very healthy, but I think it hasn't yet been had to the extent that it's been independent, it's been honest, and it's held people accountable, in my view.
That's true. I mean, and again, we're debating arguably the most important issues of our time. Now, I don't want to make more of our podcast than it is. I mean, guys, we're talking about the next frontier of value in terms of there's the Internet of Things, but we're really talking about, as Don Tapscott puts it, the Internet of Value, and really how value is going to be defined and extracted in terms of the digital economy, and how well equipped as African nations we are to actually add value on a global scale. And you can't ignore these issues in the context of what is now the largest single direct foreign investment in Kenya, and also ignore the signal that sets in terms of, one, it being an infrastructure play, two, it being a tech play, three, it being a renewable energy play, and then four, realizing that if there wasn't serious value to be derived, commercial value to be derived, you would not have assembled a consortium as sort of hefty and as well, healed to commercialize on this opportunity as they have in this situation. And I think it's, like you say, really good that we talk about it and also get Kenyans thinking about, hey, okay, so about this value that is the overarching reason why we should be excited about this beyond the commercialization and beneficiation in other ways. Sure, this is going to change lives. Sure, this is going to give us a head start on the region and perhaps the rest of sub-Saharan Africa in terms of like creating our own energy and cleaner energy at that. But we need to start also measure the value or the perceived value that we're getting from a project like this with the long-term commercial value that the partners who have brought it to our shores, are going to sort of continue to rake in as a result.
Yeah. And I mean, if I can just take on a little bit of a detour, I mean, I really want to liken this to the discussion and the debate around property rights, right? If you think about it, I think property rights go back to like the 1600s or whatever it was. But a long time ago, right? And it was a set of rights that were developed, and they were developed at the exclusion of many different race groups, right? And those rights were quite simple. The right to use a good, the right to earn an income from a good, the right to transfer the good to others, and the right to enforce property rights, right? Those were the four basic tenets of property rights. And to this day, those tenets still govern the way people interact with property, transfer property, and have access to it. I really think in history we're at a watershed moment in relation to the internet and digital, where if we are not defining what those rights are and the behaviors that transfer value, we're going to find ourselves in 100 years' time looking back on a set of rules that we just were never ever aware of. We weren't part of the playing field and weren't ever able to get any kind of benefit from. So once again, as you said, I mean the idea here is not to offend. The idea is to push and to think. But we need to be very honest with where we are in terms of a moment in time, and hopefully through the debate and through the discussion get to a place where there's a better level of understanding as opposed to the offense that is taken sometimes. And as Mark said last time, is that we've got strong views here, but we hold them lightly. But we are open to alternative views, and and I appreciate anyway the feedback that we've gotten around our views. So that's been really great.
But also, offense is taken, not given.
Boom.
All right. No, we love you, fam. We love you, fam. No, but keep it coming. People stepped up to me at the conference, as many of you do when you see me in person. We see the emails. I've been on WhatsApp back and forth, which is great. We love that. That's what we're here for. But for sure, the conversation must be had. And so that's what we're here for. Let's talk e-commerce next. Rocket Internet has recently put out their first quarter results for 2017. Of course, the reason we're interested in a European-based tech fund and their reports is because they happen to have a major stake in what is one of the largest e-commerce players on the continent. And of course, we're talking Jumia, the Jumia Group. MTN owns about 41.4% of it. So technically, they love to go to market with how, okay, we're totally African. Without a doubt, Rocket Internet owns a big chunk of that. Startling news, in fact, is that Jumia's revenues have declined by 16.9% year on year to just 19.2 million euro. And that's down from 23.1 million euro for the same period last year. It's also reported gross margins lower year on year at 28%. That's down 34.8% for the same period last year. And look, I mean, there are all sorts of excuses that are being put out for this reason, not least the economic downturn that Nigeria has faced of late. But also what they're saying has been a shift to a marketplace model, which they didn't take on before.
Yeah, I think the bad news, unfortunately continues to happen as they've seen huge macroeconomic changes. Especially in markets where I'm pretty sure they had big bets like Nigeria and Egypt. Lots of stuff around foreign exchange scarcity, around the devaluation of currencies, et cetera, et cetera. And I think even at a macro level, if you look at one of their owners, Kinovec, which sold their remaining stake in Rocket Internet after they saw a 4% drop. Swedish company actually withdrew their investment. And in so doing, I think it's another negative signal as far as Rocket Internet is concerned. But more so in their context where they had placed big bets in emerging markets like Nigeria, I think there's a lot that they need to do to get that back on track. But I think the shift in the model plus the uncertain external economic landscape is a tricky one to navigate. So yeah, not the greatest of news, but I think we need to watch that closely.
There was a huge bullish push towards investing in e-commerce, in the last sort of 4 or 5 years within Nigeria. And Nigeria specifically, given its population size, people just thought it was the sure bet that was going to grow. People saw, the growth in smartphone penetration, increases in internet penetration, and just thought, man, the gravy trains in, guys, let's jump on board. And it just hasn't turned out that way. And to be fair to the Nigerian market, it's not just Nigeria. I think there's been a ton of oversimplification in terms of what it takes to succeed in the e-commerce scene, not just there, but even in relatively more developed market like South Africa. I think people totally underestimate what it costs to acquire and keep a client within the context of e-commerce on the African continent, certainly within Nigerian context, and just how far ahead of the curve companies like Jumia and perhaps Konga are, and how ready they need to be to sort of just muscle their way or money their way to sustainability, because it's nowhere near happening within the next year or 18 months even.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the typical things is the trap of report-based strategy versus tactile or experience-based strategy. I think if you look at any of the reports, Nigeria is like this big glowing opportunity, but your tactile experience of what it's going to take to deliver on that opportunity generally is something different. So when I looked at e-commerce and I looked at Nigeria, and you go there and you kind of weigh up the pros and cons of some of the issues around last mile delivery, it makes you step back and kind of reconsider. So while I believe there's a huge problem to be solved there, I do think that there's going to need to be a little bit more of a tactile based or a tactile approach to how to figure that out first and foremost, and probably a little bit more of an investment from an infrastructure perspective around moving goods around, and maybe experimenting with stuff that's a little bit less conventional. I know there's been a lot of stuff being done around motorcycle delivery, et cetera, et cetera. Do we need to be moving more to drone-based kind of stuff? I mean, that's a question that we need to solve for huge traffic issues, et cetera, et cetera. So I think a more tactile approach needed there to really survive. But as I said, let's watch the space.
I'm certainly betting on them to get it right eventually. I think the success in this space is going to go to whoever can outlive their competitors, because there's no doubt that the market is going in that direction and that the addressable market will grow, and it in fact is growing, will grow. How fast, on the other hand, I can't say, but I'm certainly bullish on the fact that it will happen. It's just, will it happen as quickly as we all hope or want? Certainly hasn't happened so far. I would have been one of those people 4 or 5 years ago who would have bet on Nigeria being easily as large an e-commerce market as some of the developing world by now, but it wasn't to be. But staying with e-commerce, interestingly, is a story that we covered recently. That is of cars45.com. We're not really speaking about them today. We're actually speaking about the group that is responsible for their successful Series A round of funding. We're talking about the Frontiers Car Group. Of course, they shelled out a good 5 million big ones to help Cars45 navigate probably what I'd estimate to be the next 12 or 18 months for that kind of money. What's interesting is EcoVC Plus is now a new investment vehicle that has been formed by EcoVC Partners and TPG Satya coming together, and they've made their first investment as a joint consortium by investing in Frontier Cars Group to the tune of $22 million. This apparently happened in May already. As part of the deal, Egosa Omoigwe, EcoVC's managing general partner, has been granted a seat on Frontier Car Group's board. They're, of course, headquartered in Berlin. The Frontier Car Group, you might already know, has operations in Chile, Mexico, Nigeria, Pakistan, as well as Turkey. Really nice to see a seasoned African tech player being given a seat at the strategy table of what's becoming quite a serious investment outfit.
Yeah, and it seems like the Frontier Group itself is kind of hedging its bets on some of the strengths which it already has. So they focus on increasing efficiency of selling and buying cars in challenging environments. I wonder what challenging environments means, but
I don't know whether Mexico, Chile, or Nigeria, or Pakistan counts as challenging, but yeah.
Yeah, I think that's they're probably very good markers for challenging environments, but they do so through technology implementation and infrastructure creation. Now, coming to the previous point on the story we discussed, the infrastructure creation piece, we can't underplay the importance of that, especially when we're solving for kind of really underdeveloped environments. They're not a young company. They've been around for a couple of years, but I think, as you said, it's quite important that the ethos of what they believe is around empowering and finding successful local entrepreneurs to build and develop businesses in a way that is specifically tailored to the market in which they operate. So the ethos around the capital approach is what we've been speaking about, and by any stretch of the imagination, what it looks like is that the approach that they're using is definitely better suited to the environment. They also believe that every environment or every market is different and requires unique skills. So I think that's a great write-up for them, and I think it's a really good signal. I think from a strategic perspective, the auto sector, auto industry is going to really need a lot of thinking to go behind it. I mean, it's one of those that in our emerging markets completely debunks any Western models around showrooms, around experiences, around how people buy vehicles, etc., etc. There's a huge piece around financing and cash and that kind of stuff. So I really think, as you said, from a strategy perspective, it's great to see that they've been able to bring a homegrown player around that table to be able to have some of those conversations. I think that's an exciting one to watch.
It'll be interesting to see how relatively more successful or less successful perhaps they are compared to their Berlin-based competition Rocket Internet, which of course does not move into markets in nearly the same way as Frontiers does. I mean, as you know, sort of Rocket Internet does the copy and paste approach. They copy successful models abroad and look for sort of markets where they think they can deploy quite quickly and fast and just where, they can sort of just swoop in with a ton of money and make it work. Let's see. Maybe Frontier Car Group will show us all how it ought to be done.
Yeah, and I think if you look at some of the other investors in the Frontier Car Group, you got Balderton Capital, London-based, TPG Growth, London-based, EcoVC, London-based, NEA, Silicon Valley, Partnership Ventures, Paris, Hummingbird Partners, Turkey, Oriflame, Sweden, Flutterwave, San Francisco, CarPrice, Moscow. I mean, these geographies are heavy-hitting geographies when it comes to deploying technology, and some of them are really, really interesting plays in markets like Turkey and Russia. So I'm quite hopeful. I think it's a interesting mix of investors. I think it's a very clear approach in terms of the markets that they're going into, and I just hope their strategy from an activation or implementation perspective is also thought through well. But I think it's really a silver bullet to have a partner involved like EcoVC. So as I said, I think really, really a good one to watch out for.
Yeah, definitely. It's becoming almost the United Nations VC type thing.
Yeah, and it's going to be good to see what they deliver.
Africa at the table, though, what's not to love? And so moving on, there are at least 301 fintech startups operating on the continent at the moment. Well, that's according to a Disrupt Africa fintech report that claims that over $92 million has been invested in Africa's fintech scene.
Yeah, fintech kind of bores me at the moment, to be very honest.
But why?
There's just a lot of stuff happening, a lot of movement, no impact. I feel like there's a lot of things and there's a lot of stuff, and 92 million, dollars and 300. How many people? How many startups? 311, 312. That's a lot of 301. Sorry, yeah. That's a lot of stuff happening, right? And for me at the moment, it's quite difficult to kind of weed the wheat from the chaff, in the sense that who's doing the stuff that's really impactful, who should be registering on the radar to be looking at. And I think it's kind of that, in the beginning of any race, like a motorcycle race, or when everybody's like scrambling and trying to figure out who's going to be the leader, who's not. I think it feels for me it's kind of that phase. And every time I try and kind of get a sense of who's doing what and being able to see what the log table, for lack of a better word, looks like, there's just something else added to it. So for me, I've kind of stepped back a little bit emotionally from it until we start to see some real impact. But the stuff that's happening, with regards to the investments, I don't think is going to change anytime soon. It seems like of the 9 fintech categories covered in the report, a number of them are in payments and remittances, and startups dominate the market. There's about 41% of those startups that are only focused on that space. So lending and financing are also potential areas. But as I said, there for me seems to be a lot of movement, no real impact yet.
I suppose we also don't get enough data on how well they're doing. We only have the investment that they land either, at the seed phase or, at the early stages or the later early stages and that kind of thing. And usually use that as an indicator of maybe the business fundamentals that underpin like how healthy a business, say like an MFS Africa, for example, might be doing. Also, we get indications here and there when fintechs get snapped up by banks, for example. It usually points to, in my mind at least, the value proposition in terms of banks finding real efficiencies that can be derived from bringing on board the innovation that they haven't been able to build on the inside. And from that standpoint, I start to sense that, there's some economic rigor applied to the excitement that, the market seems to be having in fintechs.
Yeah, fair point. I think there might also be an opportunity for us on the show to figure out if we can dedicate a show to kind of the fintech leaderboard. So maybe, dissect it into the lending space, transacting space, et cetera, and maybe try and just give an understanding of, the players in that space. And
who's doing what?
How it's stacking up. I mean, 301 startups is a lot of startups, right? So anybody that is interested in that space or has data about what's happening in that space would be great to share it, so that we can give a slightly better analysis of the whole thing. Because I think going into one at a time when you've got 301, I think is a big ask.
Yeah, also, I like that. And I like what Disrupt Africa has done here by sort of subcategorizing them. But a leaderboard would really be a good idea. And of course, any of you keen on sending us insights, go ahead and do it, man. Drop us a voice note, an email via hello@African Tech Roundup, or drop us a tweet, or hit us up on Instagram @African Roundup. And of course, we are on Facebook, facebook.com/African Tech Roundup. Yeah, we'd love to hear from you. Who do you think is getting it right now in terms of fintech? What should we be super excited about? What should we be less excited about? You let us know and we put it on the show. Now to Nigeria next, where we update a story that we covered some months ago. Etisalat Nigeria owing its creditors something like $1.7 billion US. And you might recall that we reported that a consortium of banks that they owe money to were looking to take over the business in a bid to basically recoup that money. There's also been rumors that Glo might acquire Etisalat. And now the whispers in the wind suggest that two of the telco's major shareholders from the UAE are in talks with the banks in question to hopefully stave off a takeover.
So Etisalat Nigeria is the number 4 mobile phone provider and is jointly owned by Etisalat and a UAE mobile phone group, which owns about 40%, as well as Bahadala Development Company, which is a state-owned investment vehicle from the government of Abu Dhabi, which owns 30%. So, I mean, I think the constitution in terms of how it's assembled is of people that seem to have a lot of access to cash. I don't think that'll be the problem. The challenge is that as they have talks with creditors and banks, they're trying to essentially make sure that the loans are paid off so that they continue to operate. We hope that they'll be able to get kind of some positive outcome. That's a lot of money. What did you say the amount was?
1.7 odd billion. I think that comes to about 541 billion naira, dude. That's nothing to sniff at, yeah?
Yeah, that's a lot of money. And I think as they go down the discussion to try and make sure that they get some resolution. There's been some back and forth around who did what, but at the end of the day, given...
Or who didn't, really? Because at this point, I mean, there's clearly something not working as well as it should.
Exactly. But as you've suggested, hopefully the conversations result in that being resolved, because they own quite a big share of the market, and consumers need to win at the end of the day.
And our mates at techcabal.com, of course, tell us that the executives over at Etisalat claim that it's only the Nigerian Communications Commission and, of course, the Central Bank of Nigeria that are currently trying to broker talks between the consortium of banks that is owed money and Etisalat, basically not admitting that anyone else is currently speaking on their behalf to try and keep them from being taken over by those banks or indeed, from being acquired or something like that. Look, like Musa says, we really hope this gets settled quickly. We did speculate on the show the last time we mentioned this, that it'd be quite interesting to see a player like maybe Econet or another local player like make a play for this. Not MTN, that'd be boring. Also, probably, I don't know if competition rules would allow that to happen in Nigeria. Never mind that MTN, even this week, has got issues in Nigeria. They're probably not interested in deepening their woes by buying something like Etisalat, but it'll be interesting to see who snaps this up.
Yeah, I think that would definitely be an interesting twist, especially with someone that comes out from outside the region. So,
like Orange or something like that.
Absolutely, that would make for good TV.
Yeah, definitely, and we know Orange is on the prowl apparently for good prospects. I don't know if they would consider this a particularly good one, but yeah, it'd be interesting.
This conspiracy theory.
Our final African item for the week involves an Egyptian investment by Egypt's largest tech fund, Algebra Ventures, which of course closed a 40 million tech fund in December last year. And they've sunk $1.5 million of that fund in an Egyptian food discovery platform called El Menus.
Yep, and our menu seems to be a startup based in Egypt, and they strongly believe that every dining decision should be social, visual, and personalized, right? So they're all about discovering and ordering the food that you'll love as a consumer, which is important. And I think if you look at food and the decisions you need to make, potentially there's plenty of those, so you'd want to be able to discover them in a quick and easy way. They're growing quite a lot, so they've got over 2 million dining decisions taking place, with over 500,000 dishes and 4,000 restaurants and growing. So great to see some innovations coming out of Egypt, which is good.
Fantastic, yeah. And perhaps to close off our show today, let's talk two international news items that sort of captured our imagination this week. Of course, everyone's been talking about the Uber CEO, Travis Kalanick. I don't know how you say that. Travis. Let's just call him Trav. So Uber CEO Trav.
TK. Yeah,
TK. Let's call him TK. So Uber CEO Trav has taken an indefinite leave of absence. He's in an email to his staff. He's told them that he needs to get over the loss of his mother who died in a boating accident, and he needs time to think and become a better person and all that. And Uber needs to become a better person.
Yeah, Uber's got lots of cultural issues. I mean, further complicating the situation, David Bonderman resigned from Uber's board after making a sexist comment at the all-staff meeting.
At the very meeting where they're trying to address sexism.
That's crazy. I've said for a long time, I've got a kind of love-hate relationship with Uber, but I think from a cultural perspective, they've just got a lot of work to do. I think there's a lot of stuff that it happens in the C-suite and the executive level, and I just think that there's some cultural disconnect, between the C-suite and what they expect and the organization that they're trying to build and run. I think there's a lot of expectation for new age companies like Uber to pay attention to the human element, and they just don't seem to get that or get it right anyway.
And I mean, there's damning findings by the law firm that was tasked to investigate if there might be, policy issues or, in fact, culture issues in the company. And of course, they found tons, naturally. And I mean, there are tons of outstanding cases around sexism and all sorts of prejudice that's been shown to minorities. And there have been some of the suggestions being made by the law firm to correct them, have been met with disdain by some, have been embraced by others. What can I say except that one of those recommendations is that a COO be brought on board. Travis has obviously been asked to step aside as that hire is made, and as to whether he'll be asked back into the driver's seat once they've appointed someone remains to be seen. But what they have recommended, and of course the board has accepted all these recommendations, is that a COO will now need to work really in a hand-holding capacity to the CEO and hopefully be tasked with changing the culture at Uber. As to whether that's going to happen or not, it remains to be seen.
That it does. But I think one thing that what they can't avoid is that as their business grows at the rate that it's growing, they're going to need to be getting a lot more employees that believe and buy into the brand. And culture being a pillar of that is going to be extremely important to them. They are making a lot of investments in driverless cars and in technology from that perspective. But
even that's embattled at the moment. I mean, there's a lawsuit around that and one of their suppliers around that. I mean, there's a lawsuit that imperils their entire riderless car situation. Oh my word. So Uber's having an MTN kind of season at the moment.
Yeah, they are, unfortunately. But as they say, never waste a good crisis. So I think there is an opportunity for them to turn things around, but it does require quite a bit of clarity and some strategic leadership. So
trust a digital marketer to spin that one.
That's me.
Wow. Well done there, Musa. Wait, it just occurred to me. Did you just do that because they're looking for a COO? Dude, are you turning this into like a CV episode?
Never. I'm not selling out. No. I wasn't. I was just, it's true. Never waste a good crisis.
How crazy would it be if they hired an African?
Geez, look at that. I mean, that's going to be a big thing for their culture issues, but they better hire one for the right reasons, not because of an African.
Oh my word. That'd take them from like diversity. Yeah, that'd do a lot for their diversity profile. But talking about diversity profile, our last story is also an international story. Yahoo's CEO, Marissa Mayer, easily one of the more high-profile women in tech in the world, has decided to step down following the company's successful acquisition by Verizon. Now, we've also spoken about this on the show, how that was nearly something that didn't happen. The huge embarrassment around Yahoo's security breach nearly compromised that deal. But Mayer is now walking away with literally millions of dollars in terms of, is it a golden handshake they call it? And it's so interesting to see some of the problematic ways women in leadership positions like Mayer are treated either in the media or certainly private conversation. When in fact, I mean, the truth is she's delivered tons of value for Yahoo shareholders who at some point had to face the prospect of losing everything as far as their investment in Yahoo is concerned. She's turned it around. She's done, I'd say, a really good job as an executive.
I completely agree. And I think, as you said, unfortunately, the spotlight is always that much more focused on females in leadership, especially in the technology space. But you cannot doubt the value that she's created and potentially delivering them from a hazardous situation. When she joined Yahoo, the share price was down, the culture was a mess, the organization needed optimization. So
she inherited a dud.
Correct, but she's been able to turn that around and be able to find a willing buyer and actually sell it for a decent amount. So I take my hats off to her and other ladies in tech, and I think it's important that we put them on the pedestal and we shine the light when we need to.
Wouldn't she be an awesome COO for Uber?
Have you been hired by Uber?
But seriously, dude, but wouldn't that be like from the frying pan to the fire though, right?
Absolutely, but you're right. I mean, in terms of her profile, being a blonde American lady to go and work at an organization that seems to have lots of issues with sexism like Uber.
But also becoming now, I suppose on some level, from a business standpoint. Now, people say a lot about Yahoo and how, it was, let's face it was a business in demise. It was always going one way. But this woman did what very few business executives could do in that context, is derive value from a really bad situation and really just keep this company from becoming typical MBA case study fodder for what not to do or how not to become another Kodak and that kind of thing. She really pulled some serious business stunts to pull off what she did. And it would be interesting to see what she does next. How's this for a mic drop moment, though? So she's asked what she looks forward to, and man, she says one of the things she's looking forward to after leaving Yahoo is using Gmail. Dang!
Drops mic. What a way to leave. But yeah.
And then she even says, you know what, it's always better I always look forward to using products that I created myself. Dang!
Of course. Can't waste a good crisis.
No, she just had to remind people that I don't care what you think of me. Some of the more high-profile successes that Google has enjoyed over the years, I've had a hand in, and I did a reasonably good job here, whatever you think of me, and I'm about to leave Bye.
Just in case you didn't know. I love that.
Yeah, I know. Good for you. And I really do wish her the best. I'll be watching her and also watching the sky for other women to inhabit the space. It's really nice to see that happen. And I hope it's not just an overseas thing. I hope it's a trend that we can start to see happen here. Of course, we know you worked for a woman over at Facebook. That's a start, I guess, Facebook Africa.
It is a start. I think there's a lot of diversity issues and challenges with lots of tech businesses. And I think, from my experience while I was working with Facebook, it definitely is high on the agenda as far as a priority to try and figure out how to address some of those challenges. A more diverse workforce, by anybody will agree, is a beneficial thing ultimately to any business, especially global businesses growing at the speed like Facebook's and the Googles of the world. So I think the diversity issue is a huge challenge. But I definitely have seen signals in the right direction. As you mentioned, Facebook Africa, even Facebook in terms of their commercial organization, there's a lot of really strong female leaders, and I'm a huge advocate for that. So I say let's make it as enjoyable a process as possible, because I think those seats occupied by men, and unfortunately middle-aged white men, can be quite uncomfortable for incoming people that are not only just women, but people that are different from what they look like. So that diversity challenge and getting the right kind of people around the table to solve these really complex challenges is ultimately all of our problem, because the limitation is going to be passed on to the consumers that we're hoping to serve. So.
And yeah, again, I was also accused by someone at Afrobytes conference recently of having it in for Facebook, which I don't. If there's something admirable they're doing, quite frankly, doing tons better than most of their contemporaries within tech in terms of having women do what they do best, which is add serious value, and acknowledge that and bring women on board to do that, well, kudos to them. Net neutrality on the other. Okay, let me not get started.
You're on such a good wicket there. Yeah. This is the part where we say goodbye.
This is the part where we say goodbye before we get into net neutrality issues. Okay, so that's the show this week, guys. One last time, many thanks to GoDaddy for sponsoring this episode of the African Tech Roundup. Now remember, you too can buy your own domain name, build your site, or use any of GoDaddy's business tools, saving yourself 30% by going to trygodaddy.com/African Tech. That's trygodaddy.com/African Tech. It's always a pleasure to have you on an episode, Musa.
Always a pleasure to be here, and I look forward to seeing you guys next time.
Certainly, guys. Please stick around. Thank you so much for sticking around till the end of the episode, and lots of great content to check out if you would like to catch up on any past episodes you may have missed. Indeed, taking some useful insights from leading thinkers and doers within Africa's tech industry. Please go ahead to africantechroundup.com. We will sort you out proper. But for now, I'm Andile Masuku.
And I'm Musa Kalenga.
Thanks for listening, folks. Do take care, Africa.